Wife overheard husband whispering to babysitter, realizes she's made a vital mistake. Mr. Richards, a famous Hollywood director, lived in a happy home with his wife and new bouncing baby boy. Like most parents, the couple had busy schedules and needed an extra set of hands around the house. His wife Grace began searching for the ideal nanny, not knowing what it would mean for her husband. There was one woman in particular who Grace warmed to immediately, much to her husband's displeasure. Then one night, as Grace walked down the stairs, she heard her husband and the nanny whispering. That's when she knew she made the hugest mistake of her life. Mr. Richards was a famous director in Hollywood. His name was quite prominent in the movie scene, making it easy for him to afford an extravagant house in a lovely neighborhood. Despite his busy schedule, he still made time for his family. Now that his wife gave birth, Mr. Richards decided that they needed to hire a babysitter. When they finally found the perfect babysitter, Mr. Richards couldn't help but feel that something was off. If only he had known how right he was. Anna was a beautiful young woman who sent in her application to be the Richards babysitter. At first glance, Mr. Richards couldn't help but notice how much skin she was showing, not that it mattered to him. He loved his wife. On the other hand, Grace didn't have any doubts about Anna. She had excellent references, and her experience was quite impressive. However, Mr. Richards wondered why the girl was so adamant about taking this job. He felt she could have gotten something better. Soon he would find out her devious plan. "You have all the qualifications we need for a nanny," said Grace. Anna was pleased to hear the remark, and she couldn't help but smirk. "Thank you. It would be an honor to work with you as your son's babysitter, Mr. Richards," she giggled. While Grace read Anna's resume, Mr. Richards noticed that Anna was batting her eyes at him. "I'm a big fan of the movies you directed. You're the reason why I wanted to become an actress in the first place." Aha. So was this why she wanted the job? To get into the film industry? Mr. Richards beckoned his wife to the kitchen for a quick word. The couple usually agreed on most things, but they didn't see eye to eye about Anna for some reason. Grace insisted that the girl was perfect and wanted to hire her immediately. But Mr. Richards had been around plenty of young women like Anna and didn't care for her flirtatious manner. "Thank you," was all he said when Anna praised him for the movies he directed. Before his wife could sign any contracts, Mr. Richards pulled her into the kitchen and voiced his concerns. Little did he know that everything was happening as part of a bigger plan, and there was no way he could stop it. "Excuse me, Anna, we need to discuss something. Can you give us 5 minutes?" Mr. Richards asked. Grace looked confused, but she smiled and followed her husband to their kitchen. "Honey, I don't like the way our new babysitter looks at me," Mr. Richards complained. "What do you mean?" Grace asked. "Didn't you notice her batting her eyes at me? And honey, I thought you wanted to hire someone a bit older," he reminded her. Grace had a forced smile on her face and replied. "Is that the problem?" Grace asked. "That she's young and beautiful. Most men wouldn't seem to mind that. In fact, I thought you would like it, considering you only have plain old me to look at when you're home," she teased. Grace knew that Mr. Richards was surrounded by beautiful actresses at work, and she had always felt insecure about it. Mr. Richards didn't realize his wife had been feeling this way. Then again, if he had, this sinister plan might not have been taking place. "Honey, what are you talking about?" Mr. Richards didn't understand why his wife would say such a thing. "John, we both know that I don't look the same since the pregnancy." Grace looked close to tears, and Mr. Richards knew he had to comfort her. Luckily, he was great with words and knew exactly what would make her feel better. Unfortunately, another problem was brewing in the living room that he had no idea about. "I know you're mingling with pretty girls at work," she said. "I guess being around an attractive girl like Anna shouldn't be a big deal for you." He stared at his wife and smiled. He leaned closer and touched her hand gently. "Hey, don't say such things. You know that I wouldn't do anything to break your trust," he said. He chose to marry Grace because she was nothing like those girls. He just wished she could see it. Sadly, Grace was too insecure and couldn't stop the plan that was in motion. Mr. Richards knew that his wife was having a difficult time since she gave birth to their baby. She was always staring at other women when they went out. He thought she was simply impressed by their fashion choices, but now he knew better. Despite her insecurity, she seemed adamant to have Anna as their nanny. He wanted to discuss the situation further. Bulletin feared that bringing up Anna would upset his wife and create doubts about his faithfulness. Only later would he find out that it wasn't his loyalty in question. "Well, if you say that I shouldn't worry about what you do at work, then I guess it's settled." Grace smirked, knowing she had won this battle. The couple decided to hire Anna as their new babysitter. Mr. Richards brushed off Anna's odd behavior and chose to focus his attention on the party he and his wife had been invited to. The Richards were good friends with many celebrities and were used to such parties. But Anna was up to something, and it would make this a night the Richard family wouldn't forget. Mr. Richards couldn't help but admire his wife while she was busy preparing for the party. "Even though she had gained extra weight, I look fat in this dress." John smiled and stared at his wife with love. "What do you mean, honey? You look magnificent in that dress." Grace grinned at him and responded, "Can you please open the door? I think Anna is here." With the image of his wife still in his head, Mr. Richards opened the front door, but his jaw dropped when he saw Anna. "What are you wearing?" he spluttered. Anna had on a tiny black dress that didn't leave much to the imagination. He couldn't remember seeing any other babysitters behave this way. "Planning on going somewhere fun after we get back?" Mr. Richards asked to break the tension. He had an uneasy feeling about Anna. Ever since he met her, she had been coming on too strong, that too, in front of his wife. Mr. Richards hoped Anna would admit to having a date after this and that she wasn't dressed this way for him. "Oh, no, Mr. Richards, I wore this especially for you." John did not expect that Anna would dress up to impress him. He suddenly felt uncomfortable after hearing Anna's response. But what could he do? He couldn't just tell her to go home and change her clothes, especially since he and his wife were about to leave for the party and someone needed to watch the baby. Mr. Richards let Anna in and watched her walk straight to the kitchen. It looked like she had a plan. Mr. Richards politely asked Anna if she wanted anything to drink. Perhaps some tea or coffee. Although he hoped she would say no because he had no idea how to operate those machines. Luckily, Mr. Richards got his wish, but it came at a price. Instead of tea or coffee, Anna requested this. "Do you have whiskey?" Anna asked. Mr. Richards let out a bark-like laugh. Surely he had heard wrong. But the young girl just had a smirk on her face. She was really turning out to be trouble. He wished his wife would hurry up and get down. "Do you think it's wise for you to have that kind of drink while you are watching our little boy?" Mr. Richards said, rather forcefully. Still, Anna didn't seem scared. She actually scooted closer to him. Mr. Richards felt frazzled and moved away from her. He couldn't help but feel his initial suspicions about her were spot on and knew that the young woman was up to no good. "So, if you ever need anything, just call us." But Anna didn't stop there. She decided to make her move. Anna knew that Mr. Richards would go for it if she used her trump card. Sensing that the girl was more trouble than she was worth, Mr. Richards decided to give her the whiskey. At least it would give him something to do and hopefully keep her away from him until his wife came down. "Okay, since the baby is asleep, I guess it's okay to drink 1 glass of whiskey," Mr. Richards announced. When he offered to pour her a drink, he noticed that Anna began to act playfully towards him. "Are you not going to join me for a drink?" Mr. Richards watched as Anna bit her lip and slid her hand closer to his. "Anna, I'm sorry, but I don't think that would be appropriate." He knew his wife would not like it if she saw him and Anna like this. But the girl didn't stop there. When Grace was done changing her gown, she went downstairs to check on her husband and their new babysitter. Little did she know that she was going to hear something shocking. Mr. Richards was already uncomfortable with Anna's manners, but things were about to get worse. "Wait, Mr. Richards. I'm sorry, just one last thing. It's always been my dream to become an actress. Would you mind taking a look at my new headshots?" Anna shoved the images in front of his face before he could respond. Anna decided to use her trump card. She began talking about being an aspiring actress and wanting to work in Hollywood. Mr. Richards remembered that she mentioned this in her interview. Anna showed Mr. Richards her alluring headshots, but Mr. Richards was unimpressed and uncomfortable with Anna's behavior. "Anna, I think that's enough," he politely told her. "We're about to leave soon, so, if you need anything, just call us." Anna wasn't ready to give up. "Wait, Mr. Richards, let me fix your tie." As she leaned closer to his neck, she whispered the following words. "Mr. Richards, I want a role in your upcoming movie," Anna said as she continued to fix his tie. "Give me a role, and I'll give you something in return." Mr. Richards already had enough of Anna's behavior. He knew what she was implying and firmly told her, no. Grace listened to the conversation between her husband and their new babysitter. When Anna tried to seduce her husband, she began to worry that her husband might give in. After all, Anna was young and beautiful. When she heard her husband firmly reject their babysitter's bargain, she felt immensely relieved. But why wasn't she angry at Anna's behavior? Anna knew that she was walking on thin ice after Mr. Richards firmly rejected her intentions. "Well, okay, I understand. You don't have to tell your wife about what happened." Mr. Richards stared at her for a long time while he tried to contain his anger. He couldn't believe that Anna would do such a thing. "Please don't fire me, I need the job, and you need a babysitter," but Mr. Richards was done with this girl. "I'm sorry, Anna, but I think you didn't hear me. This isn't up for discussion," Mr. Richards said. "I love my wife, and I wouldn't do anything to break her trust." Even though they badly needed a babysitter to look after their baby, John chose to do the right thing. "Anna, you're fired." When Anna tried to convince him not to dismiss her, Mr. Richards just showed her the door. When Anna left, Mr. Richards knew he had to tell Grace what happened. As soon as his wife entered the kitchen, Mr. Richards told her everything that occurred. "Honey, you wouldn't believe what happened. I fired the babysitter. She tried to seduce me." Grace was silent for a moment, then she burst out in tears. "I knew something was off about her, honey. I had to fire her because of what she did," Mr. Richards stated soothingly. He didn't mean to make his wife upset. Eventually, when she stopped crying, she simply replied, "Oh my, that's awful." His wife's reaction surprised him. "Is that all you have to say?" he asked. "Well, it's only normal for you to experience such things," she said. "You talk to other women at work, and I know you've encountered these scenarios countless times," Grace said. John looked at her bewildered. He decided to pause. "You know I have never cheated on you," he said, "and if someone crosses those boundaries I will always tell you." He couldn't understand why his wife would think such things. After hearing her husband's side, Grace knew that she made a huge mistake. "John, will you forgive me?" she pleaded. "Everything that happened is my fault," she claimed with a fresh set of tears running down her face. All the makeup she had applied was now ruined. She just hoped that her marriage wouldn't suffer the same fate after her husband heard the truth. "John, it was all a test," she told him. "I wanted to know if you will fall for Anna's attempts and if you would choose her over our child and me." Why would Mrs. Richards do such a thing? John was confused about his wife's confession. Why would you do that? He couldn't understand what was happening until she made another shocking revelation. "John, I became insecure of myself after the pregnancy," she said. "My body was not the same as before." She was scared that her husband might leave her because he no longer found her beautiful in his eyes. When Grace was younger, her father left them to marry a younger woman, and she was always scared of this happening. "I know I am not beautiful, and it terrified me that you might leave me like my dad left my mom because you didn't find me attractive anymore." Mr. Richards pulled his wife in for a hug and assured her that would never happen. Eventually the couple began to laugh, and Mr. Richards had a more serious question for Grace. "Where did you find Anna? I've met a lot of actresses in my life, but she was really bad." Grace laughed at this statement. "Actually, Anna isn't really an actress. She's your new assistant and also my third cousin. I asked her to help me with the plan, and if you passed, I told her that she could become your new assistant. Don't worry, she's really good at planning." Mr. Richard laughed. It was difficult to stay angry at Grace. "And what if I hadn't passed your test?" Grace was smiling too. "I didn't want to consider that possibility, but I guess she could have taken your whiskey collection. She seems to love it." Mr. Richard smirked. He knew about that all too well. Trust is the most important aspect of a relationship because it will enhance your love. Without trust, love in a relationship will become unstable. When you trust your partner or spouse, you will have the reassurance that your relationship will survive. It will also help you and your partner overcome obstacles.